We did talk about John Brown in episode 301, which is West Virginia crimes. But obviously that was mostly in relation to his time in West Virginia. So I'm going to tell you quite a bit more about John Brown today.
Cool.
And just so you have a nice little visual, I've got pictures of him on the drive, which I highly recommend you look at, which will be on the blog. He looks like a hot, angsty Abe Lincoln.
Oh, yeah.
Do you see him?
1,000%.
Doesn't he?
1,000%. That haircut is incredible.
He's got
it's very
nice,
ahead of its
thick
time.
hair. He looks tall.
He's massive forehead.
Thin lips. He just like really prominent eyebrows. He looks so self-assured.
A severe crease between the eyes and forehead.
Yes.
He has especially in that for most of his life.
Daguerreotype. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, he means fucking business.
Yep.
He did not come to play.
No.
John Brown was born on May 9th, 1800. He was a Taurus.
Wow.
He was born in Torrington, Connecticut, to a devout family with extreme anti-slavery views.
Wow. All right, Connecticut.
Devout Christian family, I should say. Throughout his life, he resided in Ohio, Massachusetts, Pennsylvania, and New York, primarily. Although he had many failed business ventures. I think one of them was like a wool producer or something like that. He had to declare bankruptcy in...
He didn't say it. He declared it.
He declared it. Despite that, he supported the abolitionist cause by becoming a conductor on the Underground Railroad and establishing the League of Gileadites in Springfield, Ohio in 1851. So this league was an organization of, as far as we know, because I think they intentionally kept lax records to protect the involved
identities. Yeah. Gileadites also makes me feel very uncomfy having watched Handmaid's Tale.
Well, I mean, the Gileadites took their name from the biblical Mount Gilead, where Gideon led the Israelites to freedom. So I think in the case of Handmaid's Tale, that was a bunch of propaganda bullshit idea. But now in this context, it's like, no, I'm leading my people. I'm leading the people to their freedom. Okay, so the League of Gileadites in Springfield, Ohio. The League was an organization of, as far as we know, Black Americans, many of whom had been recently enslaved themselves. There is evidence that there were also white people who were kind of worked as facilitators. I mean, John Brown was white, so there's that. This illegal armed network for mutual defense was established to help runaway enslaved people escape to Canada. It was going to get them all the way up. So they had a whole agreement with rules. They had like a charter, basically, which I think it's interesting that they didn't keep exact records in order to identify like who was part of the Gileadites and who wasn't, but also like a charter with like essentially a little constitution and like a list
like it was very official, but it was also partially anonymous, which like doesn't make sense.
It makes perfect sense. It was incredibly intentional because they knew exactly what they were doing.
Right. It just like those two things don't usually go together.
Exactly.
So it seems so weird. Yeah.
Exactly. But it's just like a really interesting piece of like, I just think it's cool that like, even if you're like not that I'm a historian, but I'm taking my information from historians. Even if you're a historian studying this, looking for this information, it's just not there because they never fucking wrote it down because they didn't want it to be known.
Yeah.
And I don't know, just like history and documentation and books and writings and publications is so important.
It's amazing. And how beautiful is it that intentional anonymity like endures because of the hard work that they did to protect each other. Like, that's a pretty fucking incredible thing to think about. That to this day, where it's people's entire jobs, where they've studied their whole lives to find information like that, still can't find it. Like, I mean,
they do have quite a bit of information, but there are just some things that are just completely left out.
Yeah.
They're just left off the record. they were hard and true facts at the time, but because they were never recorded or written down anywhere, it's just completely lost to history.
It's kind of beautiful.
I think it's beautiful too.
I love it.
So their slogan was "Union is strength." And by the way, speaking of how foxy John Brown was, if you've got the hots for him, here's a quote from one of his friends, a man named Thomas Thomas.
Okay, TT.
TT was a black man. He was just one of his associates. I think most of John Brown's associates were black men. He definitely ingratiated himself with the black community. So Thomas says, quote, "When he was here, he was smooth-faced and had black, heavy hair brushed straight up from his forehead. He always dressed in plain browns, something like a Quaker. He wasn't tall nor anything of a giant, as some represent, and he wasn't at all fierce or crazy looking. He was medium in height, and he was quiet and agreeable to talk with. He was a gentleman and a Christian." So remember this quote kind of later, because later in life, there was some propaganda and some aggrandizement of him being this like
violent
monster, a reckless zealot, maybe. So I think this quote was probably given, I imagine this quote was given later, and it was sort of like
in response to all this bullshit that's out there about him.
Exactly.
Okay. That's cool.
So as Britannica would describe it, John Brown became obsessed with the idea of taking overt action to help win justice for enslaved black people. At the age of 55, he moved with his sons to the Kansas Territory to assist anti-slavery forces struggling for control in that territory. So again, bloody Kansas. Kansas was a battleground at this point. This time is characterized by things like electoral fraud, raids, violent assaults, and murders, both in the Kansas Territory and Missouri between pro-slavery border ruffians, is what they called themselves, and anti-slavery free staters. We don't know exactly how many political murders were committed during this time, but it's somewhere between 56 and 200.
It was a lot.
Well, and this is pre-Civil War. This is just like uprisings.
Yep.
But
because like you said, that was a key state. It was seen by the Confederacy essentially as a key state to unlocking the North and bringing slavery to the North.
Absolutely.
And so they were literally willing to die fighting
both sides.
For their cause, on both sides.
Yep.
Because they felt like there was so much, because there was so much to lose if the South had won.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, I mean, we'll get to that, but this shit gets so much more intense and dramatic. And like, I don't know. Thinking of myself being put into this situation, it must have been so terrifying, but at the same time, so you'd have to be so brave, but you'd have such a feeling of like honor to fight for this thing that is so much in your face and so like ethically, morally on the line as like, should people be owned or not? And I understand that the context that we think of it today is totally different from how they saw it because it was part of, chattel slavery is part of their economy. It's part of the culture for better or worse. But I think that the bravery of these people who stuck up for it and were just like, absolutely not. I'm putting my own life on the line because this is fucking wrong. And there's no amount of rule of law, basically, decorum, precedent that's going to stop me from completely laying it all on the line.
Well, right. Because people are dying every day because of it.
Yeah.
It's like, this was
But this is when white people started laying their lives on the line about it.
Yeah.
I mean, it wasn't always like that. This is this is the start. This is right before the Civil War.
Yeah.
Right before. So we have the Border Ruffians and the Free Staters. And again, somewhere between 56 and 100. I think the majority of the losses were on the Free Stater side. Mm-hmm. But either way, there was a lot of people. There was a lot of bloodshed here. Mm-hmm. So John Brown and his 5 sons, I believe, settled in the Osawatomie area and soon became the leader of anti-slavery guerrillas in Osawatomie. So in 1856, there was the sacking of the town of Lawrence, Kansas. That's where my friend Ellen's family is from, I think. Aww. Hi, Ellen.
Hi, Ellen.
So they sacked the town of Lawrence. The sacking was done by a mob of slavery sympathizers, so pro-slavery people, in 1856. And also there was an incident on the Senate floor where an abolitionist senator named Charles Sumner was attacked and beaten with a cane by pro-slavery South Carolina Representative Preston Brooks. It almost killed Sumner.
Yeah, this is like some January 6th shit.
Yeah.
Like, that's the shit that they were doing.
He was almost killed on the floor of the Senate. By this fucking old dude with a cane. It was just like, bap, 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 bap.
Yeah.
And it's because Charles Sumner had, like, a couple days earlier delivered this speech about, like, you should be ashamed of yourself. Slavery is bad. Da 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 da. And he was mostly speaking, like, to or about, like, the cousin of Preston Brooks.
Okay.
So old man cane using Preston Brooks. Not that using a cane is a bad thing, but it was
but using
his
it as a weapon
murder
is not
weapon.
a great thing. Yeah.
Just try to beat him to death.
Yeah. Right there in front of God in the Senate.
In the chambers.
My God.
So John Brown saw this and the sacking of Lawrence, and he was determined that he had a mission to take vengeance. So on May 24th, 1856, he led a nighttime retaliatory raid on a pro-slavery settlement at Potawatomi Creek. I think this raid was a little bit of a slow burn. I think it took like a couple days, but there were conflicting reports.
Okay.
So in this raid, Brown and a group of men dragged 5 unarmed men and boys from their homes, pro-slavery men and boys. Not that that makes it like, better necessarily, but that's what, that was the impetus.
It's an uprising. This is what happens.
He brutally murdered them by hacking them to death with swords in front of their families. This incident became known as the Patami Massacre and was one of several that stirred national controversy over Bleeding Kansas and the issue of slavery in the U.S. territories during the mid-1950s.
I'm sure that pro-slavery factions use that, undeniably extreme violence that I'm certainly not condoning, but, then it just gets whipped into additional propaganda and politicized for their cause.
Kind of, but like actually in effect, it just ignited like a wave of fear among at least local slavery apologists, but they started calling John Brown Old Osawatomie Brown. Osawatomie, sorry. Old Osawatomie Brown. I think that it's like Potawatomi, Osawatomie. I think it's the same area. But they started, like word spread and pro-slavery groups and
we're like, shit, we better knock it off. This guy's gonna fucking come and kill us.
Well, they were like, oh shit, they're gonna stop at nothing to like get us. Like this was a really, really big deal. And an even bigger deal. On October 16th, 1959, so this was, 3 years later, John Brown led a group of followers and attempted to seize the federal armory at Harpers Ferry, then Virginia, now West Virginia. in order to distribute weapons to enslaved people so they could rise up against their slaveholders. Mm-hmm. He did receive some assistance from Frederick Douglass and Harriet Tubman. Mm-hmm. So they were all like contemporaries, and they were all kind of clued into each other politically tied. Working together. And this was the main precipitating event to the Civil War. Mm-hmm. That was the Harpers Ferry issue. So it was, again, a BFD, big fucking deal.
Yeah.
This is from my lover, Encyclopedia Britannica. The raid on Harper's Ferry was intended to be the first stage in an elaborate plan to establish an independent stronghold of freed slaves, his words, not mine, in the mountains of Maryland and Virginia, an enterprise that had won moral and financial support from several prominent Bostonians. Choosing Harper's Ferry because of its arsenal and because of its location as a convenient gateway to the South, because that Harper's Ferry was where a bunch of railways and river routes came through.
Okay.
So it was like on the Atlantic too. Sorry. John Brown and his band of 16 white people and 5 black people seized the armory on the night of October 16th. Sporadic fighting took place around the arsenal for 2 days, and on October 18th, combined state and federal troops, the latter commanded by Colonel Robert E. Lee, subdued John Brown and his collaborators. 17 men died in the fighting.
Damn.
So something that I read too is that John Brown had expected to arrive in Harper's Ferry and like the surrounding area, spread the word of the impending uprising to enslaved people in that area, and like give them weapons and be like, meet us at 6 o'clock on this date at this place, and we're gonna like overthrow everything. But the people in that area were not inclined to just blindly follow like this white guy they had never heard of before.
Fair.
So the support that he had anticipated never really materialized, and that's basically why this whole plot fell through. Which was, I mean, that was not really preventable. Like, how could you really make yourself known or popularize yourself in advance? You're just kind of showing up and being like, hey guys, here's a gun. Meet me here. We're gonna free you.
Yeah, and that element of surprise is so,
like, I have a family. I'll probably get killed. No, you know. Yeah, and because of the element of surprise, there was no time to really communicate with these groups beforehand. So yeah, 17 men out of 21 died. They captured the rest of them. The subsequent trial of John Brown and his men for murder, inciting slave rebellion, and treason was widely reported in the national press. His speech upon conviction was printed in 50 newspapers, including on the front page of the New York Times.
Wow.
And John Brown's speech, in this speech, he proclaimed, quote, "If it is deemed necessary that I should forfeit my life for the furtherance of the ends of justice and mingle my blood further with the blood of my children and with the blood of millions in this slave country whose rights are disregarded by wicked, cruel, and unjust enactments, I submit. So let it be done."
Damn. Well, I sure hope you liked that clip. If you did like that clip, make sure you are subscribing to our YouTube channel, leaving us a nice review, and joining us on Patreon for even more video content, audio content, salacious content all around. Come join us. Treat yourself.